March 2022, Beirut, Lebanon. Lines are stretching endlessly in front of bakeries. It's 5 a.m. People have been waiting since long before the sun even touched the horizon, all just to buy a single loaf of bread. Lebanon was already collapsing under a massive economic crisis. The currency had plummeted. Electricity was only on for a few hours a day, and hospitals were running out of medicine. But then, a new shock hit. The price of wheat skyrocketed. Lebanon relies on imports for over 80% of its wheat, and a huge chunk of that came from Ukraine and Russia. Then, in February, war broke out. Ukrainian ports were blockaded. Wheat exports stopped. To make matters worse, Lebanon's grain silos at the port of Beirut had already been destroyed in the 20 explosion. There were no reserves. Without wheat, you can't make bread. And without bread, people starve. Not a single shot was fired in Lebanon. No Russian soldier ever set foot on Lebanese soil. Yet, the war in Ukraine snatched the food right off the tables of the Lebanese people. This is the reality of food geopolitics. Wait, before we dive into this story, let's look at one fundamental fact: humans cannot survive without food. It sounds obvious, right? But in the world of geopolitics, this simple fact carries immense weight. If oil runs out, the economy stalls, but we have time to adapt. We can find other energy sources. If semiconductors vanish, technological progress stops. But even then, we have time. But what if there's no wheat? What if there's no food? You have exactly 3 days. After 3 days of hunger, humans start to lose their reason. Riots break out. Regimes begin to crumble. Food is a weapon more primal than energy and more direct than technology. It's immediate. History is littered with examples of food being used as a weapon. In 1932, the Soviet Union forcibly seized food from Ukraine in what's known as the Holodomor. Millions starved to death in a deliberate act of genocide through hunger. During World War II, Japan seized food across Southeast Asia, and in Vietnam alone, over 2 million people starved. Food has always been a love war, but in the 21st century, the method has changed. You don't steal food with a gun anymore. You cut off the supply chain. Look at why Ukraine is so critical. They call Ukraine the Chern Oz-M region. The black soil. It is the most fertile land on earth. The soil is so rich in organic matter the ground itself looks black. Ukraine's land area is about 3 times the size of the Korean peninsula, and a vast portion of it is this fertile black soil. Do you know what the result of that is? Ukraine is the world's 5th largest wheat exporter. It's 4th in corn. It's the world's top exporter of sunflower oil, and 3rd in barley. Ukraine's share of global food exports is staggering. And Russia. Russia is the world's #1 wheat exporter. Together, these 2 countries account for nearly 30% of all global wheat exports. And then, those 2 countries went to war. Look at what happened the moment the war broke out. The Ukrainian port of Odessa was blockaded. The Russian navy choked off the Black Sea. Cargo ships loaded with wheat couldn't leave. Ukrainian farmers had planted their seeds, but they couldn't sell what they harvested because the ports were closed. The grain had to sit in silos. Meanwhile, global wheat prices exploded. Within just 2 months of the war starting, wheat prices surged by more than 60%. Do you know where that shock hit hardest? It went straight to the world's poorest nations. Take Egypt, for example. Egypt is the world's largest wheat importer. The Egyptian government has long provided heavily subsidized, cheap bread to its people. They call this breadish, which in Arabic literally means life. Bread is life. When wheat prices rise, the burden on the Egyptian government subsidies becomes unbearable. If they cut the subsidies, the price of bread goes up. And when bread prices go up, the the Egyptian people take to the streets. In fact, do you know why the Arab Spring broke out in 2011? There were many causes, but one of the major triggers was a sudden spike in food prices. Rising bread prices were the spark for the uprising. Food topples regimes. Food creates revolutions. So the wheat fields of Ukraine are not just farmland. They are the foundation that maintains political stability for dozens of countries across the Middle East and Africa. When those fields became a battlefield, the dominoes began to fall. Now let's go deeper. Not many people understand how the global food system actually operates. There are these grain majors, for companies known as the ABCD IDM, Bunge, Cargill, and Louis Dreyfus. These four companies control between 70% of the global grain trade. High Farmer grows the wheat, but from that point until it reaches the consumer's table, the transport, the storage, the processing, the distribution, these four companies control the entire process, and they are all companies backed by American or European capital. Do you think China just sat back and watched this? Not a chance. In 2014, China acquired the Noble Group, a major global grain firm, and in 2017, they bought the Swiss company Syngenta, one of the world's largest seed companies, for $43 billion. A seed company. Seeds are the very beginning of food. Whoever controls the seeds controls the origin of the entire food supply. China is digging deep into the upstream of the global food supply chain. We also have to talk about fertilizer. To grow food, you need fertilizer. Without it, crop yields plummet. Modern agriculture relies on three key ingredients: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. To make nitrogen fertilizer, you need natural gas. Russia is the world's largest exporter of natural gas. They hold the raw materials for fertilizer. What about phosphorus? Morocco holds over 70% of the world's reserves of phosphate rock. And potassium. Russia and Belarus are the world's top exporters. When sanctions were slapped on Russia and Belarus because of the war, fertilizer exports were choked off. When fertilizer becomes scarce, what happens? Crop yields drop. When yields drop, food becomes scarce. When food is scarce, prices rise, and people in poor nations go hungry. The gunshots were fired in Ukraine, but the starvation happened in the Sahel region of Africa. The ripples of war cross oceans and deserts to flip the dinner tables of people on the other side of the planet. This is where we have to look at China's food strategy. China has to feed about 18% of the world's population, but it only has about 9% of the world's arable land. That gap is the source of China's food security fear. Do you know how they're solving that fear? They're buying land outside their borders. They are leasing or purchasing massive tracts of farmland in Africa, Southeast Asia, and South America. Chinese agricultural firms move in, run the farms, and ship the harvest back to China. Zambia, Mozambique, Ethiopia, Cameroon, hundreds of thousands of hectares in various African nations are fallen into Chinese hands. I mentioned Africa in Part 3, how Europeans exploited African resources during the colonial era. In the 21st century, a similar structure is repeating itself under a different name. They aren't seizing the land, they're buying it or leasing it. But the result is much the same. The food grown on that land doesn't end up on the tables of the local people. It gets on a boat and heads to China. The resource curse I talked about in Part 6 applies to food as well. Do you know what the biggest vulnerability of the current global food system is? Concentration. There are only a handful of major wheat exporters: the US, Canada, Australia, Russia, and Ukraine. If just 2 or 3 of these countries run into trouble, the whole world shakes. What about rice? Thailand, Vietnam, India, and Pakistan are the main exporters. Corn. The US is the undisputed number 1. If a drought hits the US Corn Belt, global corn prices soar. This is where climate change becomes terrifying. In Part 8, we talked about the Arctic and how climate change is shifting geopolitics. It's the exact same food geopolitics. Extreme heat/wheat yields. Frequent floods destroy rice crops. Prolonged droughts wither the corn. Climate change makes food production unstable. And that instability fuels geopolitical conflict. Think about the Syrian civil war that started in 2011. Many analysts point to the extreme drought that lasted from 2006 to 2010 as a major factor. The drought destroyed agriculture, drove rural populations into the cities, and as unemployment and poverty piled up, it finally exploded into an uprising. Climate change created a civil war through the medium of food. Let me show you a very uncomfortable statistic. Do you know how many people die of hunger every single day right now? About 25,000. Every day. Many of them are children. The world currently produces more than enough food to feed the entire global population. People aren't starving because there isn't enough. They're starving because of distribution. They're starving because supply chains are broken, because conflict zones block food from entering, or because they simply don't have the money. It's not a food shortage. It's food geopolitics that is starving people. It is a manufactured hunger. So what about Korea? Let's talk about us for a moment. Do you know what Korea's food self-sufficiency rate is? Our grain self-sufficiency is only in the 20% range. While we produce our own rice, we import almost all of our wheat, corn, and soy. If the global food supply chain trembles, Korea takes a direct hit. You might remember the spike in prices for flour and cooking oil during the 2022 Ukraine war. The price of ramen went up, chicken prices rose, and bread got more expensive. The burning wheat fields of Ukraine are directly connected to the Korean dinner table. In Part 9, I said Korea faces geopolitical pressure, squeezed between the US for security and China for the economy. What about food? We're buying it from the US, Australia, and Brazil. If those supply chains are cut, our very survival is threatened. It's the fate of a small, peninsula nation. It's a structure where we struggle to be self-sufficient in almost anything. Let's wrap this up. Think about a single bowl of rice. That rice grew in a field. It was given fertilizer. It was harvested by machines. A truck carried it. A ship crossed the ocean. It went from a port to a warehouse, from a warehouse to a market, and finally from the market to your table. Somewhere along that long journey, there is a war. There are sanctions. There are climate disasters. There are the interests of superpowers. A single bowl of rice is the end product of geopolitics. The fact that you can eat today is thanks to countless geographical conditions and geopolitical stabilities being maintained simultaneously. If those conditions shake, your dinner table shakes first. And when the dinner table shakes, people take to the streets. When people take to the streets, regimes shake. And when regimes shake, war begins. Everything starts with a meal. The most primal and most powerful weapon of geopolitics is food. Who holds that weapon? That is the core of the 21st century food hegemony war. In the wheat fields of Ukraine, in the farmlands of Africa, and in the seed companies of China, that war is quietly raging at this very moment. Right there, on your dinner table,